And we're live for the first episode. John, the man with the luscious locks and the bodacious beard from Adaptive Growth, thank you very much for being my first guest on the small budding podcast that is the Sales Sleuth Podcast.
Man,
how are you doing?
I'm good, dude. I'm just really, really happy to be here. Thanks for having me on as the first guest. I hope it's a good rep.
I hope so too, and that it's actually useful for the people that I'm posting it for and for yourself.
Yeah.
And my pipe just died, so the whole on-brand thing is going to need some stoking, it seems. I think as a sort of an intro, what is it that you do over at Adaptive Growth? You mentioned you had a really good coaching session, and you had the live stream earlier where you guys talked about coaching versus mentoring. So what is it that you do when you're not growing really cool long hair?
I mean, first of all, I would like to compliment you on your alliteration game, bodacious beard and luscious locks. That was just fantastic. So
I worked hard on that one.
I appreciate that. Adapted Growth, we work with sales, essentially, is the broader umbrella. And more specifically than that, we build process, we customize CRMs, we do training and onboarding, and we also work with salespeople to help continue to develop their skill set of having really great conversations that lead where you want them to lead. So it's too broad of a lane. My marketing coaches don't like how I describe what I do currently, but it is what it is.
Okay. So what should it be differently then if your marketing coaches don't like it?
I help X within Y within Z time frame.
Okay. So the LinkedIn elevator pitch approach of have this formula.
Yep.
Okay. I've been told that I need to do the same thing for my stuff after we practice the whole elevator pitch thing. But cool. So how did you get into the CRM system setup game? Because I've done some work in a couple of companies where they had no CRM and it was Excel sheets, and it's a nightmare. So how does that whole system work as a consultation approach?
Yeah. So my love for CRMs actually comes from like way back in the day. I was a professional poker player back in 2006. And so my entire income came from playing poker. And I had a poker coach at the time, and he introduced me to some software that I can use as a poker player to do things differently. And in the beginning, I didn't see any value in it. I was just kind of like, why do I do this thing? I'm just trying to be better. And then I started to use it. And it revolutionized how I hold myself accountable as a poker player and someone who makes their money off of gambling. Because before this tool, I could just look at it daily or weekly. I won on Saturday, I lost on Sunday. Okay, Whereas now I could go in and I could look at every hand I played within like a 5-hour session, right? And I could look at very specific things. Like I seem to be losing a lot today with like ace, which is the best hand you can possibly start with. Why are those things happening? And I can go look at trends and patterns and make meaningful improvement as a poker player. So fast forward, I'm working with my business partner, and we're looking for a CRM. And the one that we were using at the time was a product called High Rise. It's by guys Base Camp, and it wasn't really super helpful for us. And we found Pipedrive, and Pipedrive was the same thing that poker CRM was for poker. Like, oh my gosh, like the feedback loop here. I can no longer tell myself that I'm being a great salesperson because I'm not closing these deals, right? I can look at it here, and that's where things started to change, right? I really just like allowing salespeople to not have to fall into the fake it till you make it kind of bravado and chip on the shoulder. You can look at your actions and look at your deal flow and then make meaningful improvement based on that, right? So, too many salespeople are approaching the problem with just like, well, I just have to act tough. Maybe not. Maybe you need to go in there and like figure out what the common denominator is, which is usually the salesperson, and figure out what needs to change to have different outputs. You got to be able to.
So you're telling me
at that feedback window yourself. Sorry, I mean to cut you off.
No. I was cutting you off. I apologize. So you're telling me that sales is not just fake it till you make it, and when you got one at the point of they said they might be interested, that it's just enough, and you can sort of just like finagle your way through the whole exercise and hope for the best sort of approach.
I just had this coaching call with a client of mine, and he got the company he was looking for, right? He's trying to cultivate a referral partner. Referral partner's coming on board. Okay, awesome. And I'm like, okay, great. You won the hand. Did you play the hand well? Right? the outcome is one thing to look at, right? If you're getting the outcomes you want, okay, great. At that point, it's just about finding some improvement, right? Because it's always a time management problem more than it's about a persuasion problem or an influential problem or an offer problem, right? So too many salespeople spend time with prospects who are not ever really going to buy. So how do you figure that out? Or how do you save time as a salesperson? How do you improve your skill set? You know, and that's really the stuff that we talk about, because anybody can show up and be an order taker, right? Like right time, right place, right money, great. Those deals are awesome. That's fantastic. That's not
Couldn't have done
selling.
that.
Yeah, I mean, everybody wants to be in the receiving end of that thing, but then there's also the quality issues. Are you getting the right kinds of people showing up and like ready to give you money and things? And the smaller your business, my personal opinion is the more you need to be concerned about, like, are you really meeting those expectations?
Which it neatly sort of segues into my next question, right? Which is the systems that the business needs to think about having in place before they even consider hiring a salesperson. Because I've been in the roles where it's generally been a small team, maybe like 2 or 3 people. The owner was doing the sales, and then they said, well, I'm tired of doing the sales, let's get somebody else in.
Yes.
And then juice it up as like, oh, the deals are just going to close because we got our targeting down. And then as a salesperson, you come in and there's nothing there. So what are some of the things that you think a business needs to have in place before even considering hiring a salesperson to make sure that when they do bring someone on board, it actually flows and doesn't have the e-break up the whole time?
Yeah. Man, so there's a lot to this, honestly, but where most things go wrong, right, is that not really understanding just how flawed knowledge transfer is when it's done verbally, right? Being a martial artist, I practice an art that is 400 years old, right? So there's no one alive who's still like part of the original like teachers and creators of the system. So it has been passed on from person to person to person using forms, right, or katas, depending upon what part of martial arts you're studying. And everyone loves to talk crap about form, but it's not meant to be like the end level of application. It's meant to be a way to pass the knowledge, right? And we're 400 years ago, not everybody had access to paper, pens, and everything, and they didn't trust themselves that the verbal was going to be enough. So let's encapsulate these things into a series of rote moves that we can pass down to make it easier, right? And this is what happens in martial arts. Well, you get a salesperson in, and the founder's been doing all the selling, right? If the founder's been selling off of instinct, they don't even know what they need to teach the salesperson so that way they can be successful in the role. And some people like to make it a badge of honor. They say, you know, I had to figure this out on my own. It's the only way you're going to get there. So just go out there and make it happen. What a terrible way to coach a brand new salesperson. Like you're not going to be successful in that kind of setup. So we try to build the documentation as well as customizing the CRM as well as everything necessary. So that way that salesperson can start with some instructions, a little bit of clarity, some guidance. And really just like on that first day, these are the kind of people you should be spending time with, and these people you don't need to spend time with because relationships are the value of a salesperson, right? Whether it's your network or whether it's your client list or whatever it is. But you can't build relationships with everybody who walks through the door. Not everybody's going to be in the lane that it makes sense to invest the time necessary to build that relationship. So that's where it becomes a time management problem. That was a super.
So how do you guys?
Long
How do you guys? No, that's okay. That's why we booked an hour, right? It doesn't have to be short, punchy stuff. If the guys want to listen to the whole episode, so what?
Cool. I'm down for that.
So how do you guys conceptualize the actual thinking of when someone needs to come in as a salesperson? Because it's mostly gut-driven from the owner.
Yeah.
Right? They sort of get a feel, yes, no, we can't work with these people. Or they, at the nightmare stage, just say, well, I've got a good feeling. Let's go figure it out, team. And then they leave their team in the shit to go figure it out.
Yep.
Right. So how do you guys conceptualize that so that it makes sense from a gut point to a sort of more scientific framework to say, salesperson, this is what you need to look for when we have a call with someone?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
How do you go about figuring that out?
So really, and everyone who's been in business has done some sort of like marketing avatar exercise. Like, let's come up with a person we think are buying things and who normally sits in that seat. And while that is valuable, you don't go one step further and say, this is what you say no to. these are the types of people that we never get good business from. They're not worth your time. They're takers, they're never givers, and all these other things. If you can't impart that kind of information, then what happens is you're just kind of empowering someone who can collect maybes, and they just become a bad messenger. Well, let me go ask the boss, right? They go to the boss, hey, can we do this thing? No, we can't do that thing. And come back to the prospect, hey, we can't work with you. Prospect is now mad. Salesperson has lost an opportunity, and the owner knew this, right? So that could have been detailed and documented and written down in a way so that way the salesperson could say, oh, actually, that's not something that we're really set up very well, so I don't think we're the right fit. The salesperson can save time, and they can actually close that loop for the prospect, and then potentially refer that prospect to a referral partner or someone else who's going to be a better fit for them because they're empowered. They know more than just, okay, I'm just here to have these conversations. Salespeople are not just there to kind of stand in the water river and deal with what comes. They're supposed to be trying to like channel some of that water off because it makes sense and it's good, and then the rest of it needs to be channeled away, right? That's what a salesperson is there to do. But if a salesperson's not empowered to say no to a deal, because every deal has value, you're not creating salespeople, you're creating bad messengers. So we start from a place of what should the salesperson say no to?
So you're saying that you shouldn't always be closing effectively, that every person should be sold to all the
Most
time.
people shouldn't be closed, right? Like, you know, in the people who have to drink the always be closing mentality are the people who are honestly not asking enough questions to determine fit. So they have to build themselves in this place of like rapid intensity of let's go after these things, because they're not asking any questions to determine needs or fit or anything else like that. So it kind of perpetuates the problem. You have to try so much harder to close if you're not asking any questions. And if you ask additional questions, closing is so much easier. But you also have to deal with the fact that like you're not going to pitch everybody if you ask the right questions, because they're showing up saying, hey, I'm not a qualified candidate for this thing. Great. You don't need a pitch then. Let's find someone who's a qualified candidate and spend time building that relationship, because it does make sense to pitch them.
Okay, cool. Which now the next question, right? Because I'm the person that's now been in sales for only 3 years and been in a couple of nightmare scenarios, and luckily I happened upon you that has a lot more knowledge in this space. So I've been involved with some business owners, like I said, where they didn't really have much of an idea what the salesperson needs to do, and I didn't really know what type of questions to ask. So I'm planning on posting this stuff in a few spaces where there's newer salespeople getting into the role, and I'd like to dive into the difference between B2C and B2B and what they need to ask there, if there is any difference at all. But what type of questions does a business need to ask a salesperson? What do they need to ask themselves and the salesperson before they even start an onboarding exercise? If they're just going through interviews, what does the business need to consider as far as what do we need and what do we have in place for a salesperson to come in?
Ooh, man, that's a good question.
Does the question make sense?
Yeah, I think so. So if I'm hearing it correctly, you're asking like before the business decides that they're going to like put out a job posting or go to these groups and like go try to rally up some interest around a sales role. What do they need before? Is that what you're asking? Okay. I think CRM.
So they effectively have a good sort of approach to getting people.
The biggest concern, and concern is like a weird thing because like it's a concern to me, but it's not a concern to these people. It's like, well, John, you can't trust salespeople, right? There's like this massive mistrust in people who are hiring for these roles, which to me is just the craziest thing ever, right? Because if you don't trust someone who's going to wear this label in your organization, you shouldn't hire them, first of all, because like this role does require more accountability, more focus, more commitment to the outcome than pretty much any other role outside of a leadership position in an organization, right? Developers are not getting paid part of their income based upon how well their code fits in the main repository of all the code being written by everybody else on the first shot. Sales is the only group that requires such a big, you have to do everything right, and there's a luck component and a part that you can't control, and that's where you make your money, right? It's a different kind of role that most other people do. But if you have a good CRM in a driven process, what happens is most owners and founders don't ever trust their salespeople. So they're, well, why didn't you close that deal? Well, it wasn't a good fit. And like, well, I could have closed them. That's not helpful for the organization. It's not helpful for the leader, and it's really not helpful for the salesperson. Okay, so why wasn't it qualified? Why weren't they a good fit? Now you can have really great conversations, but it requires a certain amount of, I guess, knowledge and awareness of the owner about not all deals are supposed to close. They have to be coming from that place of abundance, because if they're coming from a place of, we need every deal to close, you're never going to be happy with any salesperson, because that's not what they do. So knowledge, experience, reps. My biggest disqualifier is people who want to bring on a salesperson, but they're not ready because they're trying to avoid the sales thing because they don't see themselves as a salesperson. And that's always problematic. You're now attributing things to this person that you are not, which is going to just lie in the expectation. They're just another human who's putting full effort and focus on this one part of the organization, so that way you don't have to. They're still going to lose deals. There's still going to be things that go wrong and stuff like that. The full focus of it is what gets you outsized return. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Can we explore a bit about the thing? Yeah. Can we explore a bit about the topic of the owner doesn't want to be the salesperson anymore, so there's sort of already rocky shores on the horizon. If they're like, well, I just don't want to do the sales anymore, but when the salesperson comes in, there's usually some friction. And I felt it even in some of the work that I've done, right? It's the typical response of just show them the pitch and all these deals should close and why aren't you closing these deals, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So why do you think there is that sort of friction from an owner,
I think,
to a salesperson, because the salesperson or the owner doesn't want to do the sales?
Well, and there's a little bit of nuance in here that's worth talking about, right? Most of the people I talk to don't want to do sales anymore, okay? But they're still able to get it done. Some people haven't been successful, and they're looking as a salesperson to be a fundamentally different kind of human than they are, and they're going to be able to do something fundamentally different. They're still having conversations, they're asking questions, which is the same thing that you should be doing. So there's it's a very small nuance, but I don't want to be the salesperson anymore versus I'm not closing these deals, I can't be the salesperson anymore. Like, one of those I'm okay working with because they've got the experience and the insights and all that stuff that I can pull out to set up a salesperson for success. The other person doesn't have enough time at the table, so I'm not going to be able to pull any insights from them. We're going to have to go kind of create them, and then expectations are potentially misaligned.
Okay. And then the reverse question is what does the salesperson need to look for? Right? Because you're sort of coming in from both perspective of either setting up the system, but also doing the interview ahead of time to see, does it even make sense for you guys to get in as a salesperson, or for me to put a salesperson here? So what types of questions does a salesperson need to ask as a sort of consultative person going into a coaching program to sell the coaching program or to sell a business service? What sort of things do they need to think about and ask before even signing contracts and saying, sure, happy to do your sales for you, and then ending up in Nightmare Island?
And for me, it starts with the outcomes, right? Like, how many people have gone through this program? How many people have subscribed to this service, and what are they saying about it? Because every founder on the planet, myself included, is too in love with their own stuff, right? So of course they're going to come up and they're going to have a different view of it. Salespeople need to make sure, it's so much harder to sell something that you don't believe actually works. And I do it, and I don't enjoy it though. It's like the worst kind of selling for me. So to me, knowing that you're actually providing a benefit to people, that the people who are buying this thing are coming out of the other end of it excited and happy and feeling like they got something that was like worth money, makes selling so much easier. Because then you're like, hey, do you want to be like this person? Right? So if there's testimonials, you should be concerned. If they don't have, how do I say this? There's a competence that happens when you're talking with an owner who's savvy and they get it, right? And it's not forced, it's not faked. And you have to do a fair amount of conversations before you can really determine the difference in the quality of these things, right? Because it sounds the same, but little differences matter, right? So ask about their outcomes. How often is a client working with you? What are they experiencing on the back end of these things, right? Get them talking about that, and then ask some additional questions, because anybody can be great for one answer, right? Asking additional questions is where you can really kind of figure out, are you being, potentially sold on a role? Is there something really there? So, okay, so what kind of outcomes do you get from clients? Oh, our clients love us so much. Okay, great. So what are they getting? Well, but they love us. Okay, great. But what are they getting? What kind of outcomes? Right? Because I need to go position in front of people who don't already know, like, and trust you. So help me out. What does this look like? What's your lifetime client value? How often are people staying with you? These kinds of things. Super important, because selling a bad product is a nightmare, right? Of a situation, especially if you're like a freelance salesperson, high ticket kind of thing, because the pressure never leaves. Ever leaves if everyone is churning on the backside of it and things like that. So that's where good fit becomes a bigger deal. So does the business work? Is it different enough? Are the benefits that the owner and founder are spouting, like, do you think there's room for those things to be tangible, valuable to the audience that you're going to be having to sell it to? Right? And it requires a little bit more due diligence than most freelance, high ticket closers people are willing to put in on the first couple of reps, because they just want the opportunity, right? So they'll get in there and they'll sell. And because sales is nuanced, it's very subjective. Some people hit these first opportunities and they work for like a tyrant, and then they're ruined for selling forever because of like one bad experience, which is really the thing that drives me nuts. My whole thing is that I'm trying to make sales approachable for anybody who wants to do it. So people who work with a bad owner and then decide, oh, you know what, I'm not cut out for this. Maybe it was the owner. It was a bad product. Maybe it was just they weren't really ready to hire a salesperson, and you just got the brunt of it because you're the first opportunity that they've had to screw it up. So it's a weird mix, because you also can't hang your value on just people to close deals, because then when you're not closing deals, right? So it's a mix of things. You got yourself. You got to know where you're going to work well, because you and I have talked about this. Not everybody wants a consultative person. Some people just want a pitch bot, right? Or a human touchscreen. Do you want this thing? Yes or no? There's no question. There's no depth. There's no concern about, are you getting what you need? That's the problem. So if you're consultative by nature, you got to go work with someone who wants that.
Which segues into...
Sorry.
Which segues into a nice discussion, because you're putting out a lot of content when you're not posting on occasion. You've got the book that you wrote about sort of what's a good approach to take with sales and that type of stuff, right? So if somebody does come out of a scenario where it has been a terrible experience in sales, and as someone has a rather good track record of that, it ages you about 5 to 6 years in about 2 months. So you tend to get a bit tired. So is it salvageable to come back from that? How do you salvage that type of stuff? Because there's going to be plenty of people that have gone through sales training from the Dan Locks and the Grant Cardones, and I don't know who else's there are that changed their name for the sake of marketing, and gotten a really bad sort of expectation of what it should be, and then got their fingers burned going into a bad opportunity. So how do you go about salvaging that spark of going into sales? Because sales is already sort of a iffy subject for a lot of people. They don't trust salespeople because you need to be sort of conniving and slimy and say whatever you can to get the deal. And then people go through the training where it's a bit more consultative focused, and then they get burnt in an opportunity. So how do you go about salvaging that sort of expectation in sales?
Well, I've been on the receiving end of this, honestly. I was ruined for sales as a profession, because I was working for a guy. He's one of my mentors. Like I taught him a lot in the book. He's one of the co-hosts on the podcast, because he eventually came around to the idea like coaching would be helpful. I was struggling in my first B2B role, right? I was trying to sell to surgeons, and they're hard people to sell to, and they don't really value relationships. And it was my first time really failing as a salesperson, right? And I was just going to go wait tables, honestly. Like my kid was in daycare. Daycare was expensive. My partner was working at a bookstore, not really making a lot of money. And I had taken a pay cut to come do this thing in a brand new industry, in a brand new segment. Right? I'd never been B2B before, And I was so fed fed up with like not being able to get any traction that I was going to go wait tables in 2 different restaurants because I was already waiting tables in one restaurant. So I figured that I quit this job, pick up another server job, make the money I needed to make, and figure out like what was going to be next. And thankfully, my forward-facing business partner after that opportunity was like, I've just been waiting for you to not want to do that anymore. What do you mean? It's like, let's talk on Monday. But that's when he was like, hey, I would like to come in and build this thing. And I said, okay, cool. I would love to do that, but I want to work this coach you've been talking about. And he's like, that's the only reason we're having this conversation. So just like walking it back, if you've been burned, it's largely up to the person, right? For me, I'm a C personality, right? So the methods, frameworks, I need a lot of consistency. I need a lot of clarity in how to approach the role. And so my first session with my coach was going over my personality, and he was trying to talk me out of it. He was like, hey, this is why sales is hard for you. And because of the experience I had in martial arts coaching and, playing poker and stuff, I'm looking at myself on paper and I'm just realizing I'm trying to learn from the wrong people, right? I just need to go find people who are weird like I am and learn from them, and then I'll be able to figure this thing out. And that was the beginning of the change, right? So what you need to do, honestly, is you go ask somebody who is a little bit detached, right? Because the owner is always going to want you to close more deals, right? So, like, what can I improve? Close more deals. Well, that's not super helpful, right? As a producer, right? So you need to go talk to someone else. Thankfully now I have a huge network of like sales people. I know probably 15 other sales coaches. I know all the people who were in this thing, so I can go test my assumptions and check in with them of like, hey, what are your thoughts on this approach? I can get clarity on it. I can make improvements. Before that, though, like, your boss is probably not the best person to ask. Your sales leader is probably not the best person to ask. You might need to talk to someone like me or someone else in like a network capacity who's really good at sales, or someone to look up to, because the other thing is, there's lots of better salespeople than me as far as what data points you want to look at, right? I don't have the highest close rate from likely to close deal. That's okay. I'm not optimizing for that. I'm optimizing for, do my clients stay, right? Meeting their expectation. Because if I'm meeting their expectation and they're staying, it's just right? But if I'm never meeting the expectation and people are just leaving, I think we go replace those people, right? So I'm optimizing for, do I think this person has what it takes to be a really great long-standing client and a really great fit for me to work with long-term? Because coaching is a very weird relationship, and it has to be approached with the right kind of approach. And if we don't have that, I can't help you at all. So it's different depending upon the person. Personality assessments help, talking to a coach or a consultant, but it's probably not the top performer on your team who wants to kind of like take a shot at you because you're asking for help, right? So you have to understand the merit of the person who's giving you the advice.
Right. And this does bring up the point of the Slack community that you're in. So there's a whole bunch of groups and stuff popping up now where it's a little bit more the ethical approach to sales, and it's not just all the juicing stuff of you can get an opportunity in like 2 months after finishing the certification, just give me $4,000 type of approach. There's a bit more reasonable approaches to it. So what's the SHERPA Slack community about? Because we're talking about sort of the networking approach and getting other perspectives of people that aren't there. And being in the community, I get to see that a lot. I get to experiment with that stuff and ask the questions. So what's the SHERPA community for? Or who is it for? Or who's it not for?
Yeah, that's a good question. The Slack community is internet only, right? So no one is in there who I've not had a Zoom call with, right? Which I think most communities can't say the same, right? So I think that kind of makes us a little bit different. But the community is really an attempt to bring this high-level sales knowledge to a wider audience, right? Like, I worked with my coach for 8 years, right? It was one of the most consistent people there. And because of that, I picked it up and I now have it and everything. But it was very, very, very expensive, right, to go and do these things and to go to the conferences and the seminars and all that stuff. So incredibly helpful, but not everybody's there. And struggling salespeople are struggling, right? So, and not everybody wants to go ask their boss, hey, can we invest in coaching? Like, come And now me going to go ask my boss that at the time was kind of an outlier. Like most people don't go make that ask. And so, well, you're not really interested in improving, because if you would, you would go ask your boss. Depending upon the organization, that's not a good expectation, right? So the SHERPA community is really a way for me to try to provide help to people who are struggling and aren't ready to invest in coaching yet. So we talk about outreach, we talk about how these things that are so important in consultative selling apply to leadership components, they apply to parenting, they apply to so many other facets of just communication, because you shouldn't be curious and skeptical and asking lots of questions only in your sales calls. It should be a way that you communicate. So that's really the thing that we're trying to do there.
Okay, which does bring up the topic, right? Because there's a bit more of a push for the sort of ethical approach to sales, right? And that's what I think you're preaching based off of the very short time of a year that I've spent with you in the SHERPA community, is that there's a bit more of the ethical approach, right? So what do you think precipitated that shift in understanding? Because I've spoken to some people with a background in the financial industry as a salesperson. It is sort of just steamroll the person, the Wolf of Wall Street approach, right? Talk lots and lots and lots and lots, and eventually the person will just break and say, okay, for the sake of my sanity, shut the fuck up. Yes, here you go. I'll buy from you. And then 2 months later, they're gone. So what do you think precipitated that change in the industry for a bit more of a, let's do this collaboratively and see if it makes sense. If it doesn't, that's fine. Yeah. Because it's not for everyone. How did you sort of make that shift internally, and what do you think caused the shift in the industry?
I learned all this from my coach and from my business partner, and from really taking a deep dive into all the tangential areas around it, right? So, like, I came up working with a Sandler coach, and Sandler is a very well-known sales training and development kind of name in the space, right? They're one of the big ones. And the conversation was like, am I going to buy my coach's business? And there was lots of conversations about it. But ultimately it just wasn't a fit for me. I didn't want to run a franchise. I was a little bit resistant around some of the things you have to do to play well with the organization. And also some of the things they talk about in there weren't things that I thought were valuable. Right. And so on my own, but I learned all this there. And what's crazy is, at the top levels of selling, right? Like in funded tech, right? Funded SaaS and stuff. Everyone is on this level. They're super inquisitive. They're asking lots of questions. They're looking back at their rearview mirror, trying to figure out how to get a meaningful improvement. And then you take one step out of that circle the majority of the time, and it feels like you're just stepping literally into the depths of hell, because it's just, well, go make something happen, champ, and clap on the back. And that's not actually the case. There's a lot of levels in between this thing, but like that's just what it feels like to me, that people want it, but they're also they're not really sure how to apply it, right? Because there is a level of this, and I was reading about this in the book I'm reading right now. This is the easiest thing to do, but it's the hardest thing to do, right? Because it feels so counterintuitive to what people think good selling is. So does that to answer the question?
Yeah. That answers the question, because again, it only really came into my orbit understanding that there is this whole other world where you can be actually celebrated as a role for asking questions and being able to disqualify people and asking them and showing them the off-ramp, as you say. In the discussion, you can ask them the question to say that it might be a good fit. It's sort of covered in the broader known methods of teaching, right? The Dan Locks and that type of stuff. You might have to tell a person no, and it feels a bit farcical, because then none of the training do they ever really gear their questions towards disqualifying a person. It's usually when they pick up an objection, handle the objection and try and talk them back in, right? The question of value or price approach, right? So the methodology of being a little bit consultative with things like Chris Voss's book and your book, which I've read, which is Selling from Scratch, right? Selling from Scratch. For people to read if they're into the whole consultative selling thing, to check that out. Yeah. So I was just curious about sort of what caused that shift for you.
I mean, honestly, What I tell people is like the questions have always been there.
It sounded like you wanted to say something.
Well, the questions and the curiosity are always there. I always have a question in the hopper, right? Like, because I'm just like naturally a curious person. What sales training gave me was the ability to like ask all my questions in a way that made it approachable for the other person, right? So I have a high level of accountability, right? I want to help people make the right decision for them. And the space that I hang within now is like marketing and advertising agencies. Like I help people bring on their first salesperson and their sales teams, because that's a completely different kind of sell than like a product sell, like a stamped widget, a vehicle, or something like that. Because in those moments, if you put it in their hands and it meets expectation, your job is done as a salesperson. So in those moments, it's about getting pushy so that way you can get in the experience to see if it meets their expectations, and it's awesome. For marketing and advertising, you're not going to be able to give someone a day one ROI, right? So you need more trust. The way to build more trust is to have a different kind of conversation, because the minute you take it to the commodity, guaranteed number of leads within 90 days, it's no longer about the relationship or anything else like this. It's just, can you hit this metric? And if you miss that metric, you're done for. It doesn't have to be that way. If you can build trust and approach the conversation differently, you don't create that pressure for your team, for your business, and potentially create a revolving door of clients coming in and leaving instantly.
What was going to be my last question is the difference between B2B and B2C, because I've done both. The first contract that I had that lasted all of 4 months was a Tony Robbins coaching package. So you kind of had a very defined thing of what you would see. It was easy of what are you looking to gain out of it. And you can sort of direct the person to this thing and say, it's cool, we cover it here, does that help, that type of stuff. So it is very sort of packaged. And then I branched into B2B, right, which is different in the sense there's no real set expectation. Everyone has different requirements, although the requirements to be more or less the same. That we want more leads, or we want more engagement on our type of thing. Everybody's unique because their mom told them so. So how do you take someone that might be in a sales for B2C and they're comfortable to the point of doing B2B type sales, or the sales that you just described?
That's a really good question. I don't. If I was to be on a B2C pipeline, I don't think that my process would fundamentally change all that much, right? The thing to remember around B2B versus B2C is that in B2B, people have goals and deadlines, and their livelihood is attached to it, right? So, let's say you're selling lead generation services to someone, right? And you're talking to like the head of sales or the head of demand. Well, if they can't figure this thing out and they don't work with you, there's potentially that their head is on the chopping block, right? So there's natural urgency there. When you're dealing with just like a B2C thing, you have to dig so much more deeper, figure out what is actually going to create scarcity, create urgency, create leverage, make them take these steps. And so that's where the high pressure stuff becomes big, because you got to be able to close them right then and right there on that pipeline, on that call, because you cannot get another opportunity because it's hard to get them back. Business is like a different kind of pace, accountability is different, and the stakes are different. So it's not really only you have to do it completely different. It's just the areas that are going to be the most advantageous to kind of hang around, ask questions around, dive deeper around are going to be different, is how I think about it.
Okay. Last sort of serious question, then we can go a little bit into the more fun stuff.
This is my favorite topic.
Up until now has been fun to me, because I get to puff on a pipe and look at a glass of whiskey, which I'm not sure that I should drink on the stream.
I mean,
but
I'm not drinking.
The last... That's like a really, really bad temptation to give to a young person, John. You should be ashamed of yourself.
Never. I'm a salesperson.
But the topic of sort of when... the topic of when salespeople and how salespeople should be compensated, because you sort of showed me the direction of RepView. I got to know that there's companies that actually pay people a salary in tech and that type of stuff. So there's this big push of it should just be commission only, and never really covers what a person needs in order to be successful in a commission-only role, and when does it make sense for there to be an actual base salary attached, and what does that need to be? Because there's a massive school of thought where people, well, it should just be commission only, and then you can make your six figures that way. And then you go look at something like Review, where the guys are selling tech, and the average owner is making somewhere between $240,000 a year, up to $1 million, and that's sales with a salary which is sort of frowned upon. So when does each scenario make sense, so that if a salesperson is going in that direction, that they can kind of go with an informed point of view?
That's a great question.
In your perspective.
Most business.
I am still recording, yes. Cool.
Okay. Sorry. I don't actually know what was happening there. Sorry. Okay.
Yes, you're back.
So the question was...
And also your picture's much better.
I'm happy about that. Okay, so the question was, when does commission only make sense? Okay. Commission only makes sense when you build a culture around commission only being like the highest level of sales inside of an organization, right? And so you see this with like financial services, right? You start off with the base, but like the big boys are commission only, right? And so then it's about earning up to that level so that way you can go be commission only. That's a cultural component, right? And it takes a lot of work to build that. Most other people aren't going to do a great job at doing commission only, because what happens is the minute that salesperson gets some skill and gets some development and they get some chops, they're going to go look for that role that has got some base. Like I know salespeople who make $150K a year, and they'll go take an $80K a year sales job to make $125, and they're willing to lose that extra $25,000 because they're getting some stability in their own income, right? So the expectations of the owner really indicate whether or not you're going to be successful with a commission-only like sales team or not. And if you want this person to do like account management, like working with a client past closing the deal, you need to pay that person a base, fundamentally so. In my opinion, if you want that salesperson to do the hard work of like prospecting and outreach and getting their own meetings, because you're not going to supply them through marketing efforts, you need to pay that person a base, right? Because otherwise you don't really know what you're going to be getting. And it's going to be potentially a whole lot of effort and work and for not a whole lot of payoff, right? So most organizations, I don't think, are set up for success when they're going after the commission-only thing. But it goes back to the idea that if you're an owner who's not been successful in a sales role, and you're hearing from everyone else that like salespeople like close deals, good salespeople close deals. Well, if you're not closing any deals, it's really hard for you to like see value in paying someone else to go do the same failed effort that you have not been able to do. So, well, we'll just pay you commission on the deals you close. Sometimes it's not a nefarious conversation. They just haven't seen success in a way that indicates that they can pay for the effort and the activities without completely exposing themselves and giving up all their margin and profit and things like that. So sometimes it's just like a bad view. Sometimes it's a forced bad view because they've not done it successfully. That make sense?
Okay. And what's your that makes sense. What's your view on the commission only setup push? Because there's the sales coaches that say, well, do our training and then you need to do setting for like 6 months of DM setting, which is effectively an SDR role, but it's commission only. You need to go do all the exercise and find all the people and do all the daily activities, doing outreach and all that type of stuff, but they want them to be commission only.
I think barter's a unique situation when it comes to this stuff, right? Because if you're being asked like, hey, come in, join in our program, and you'll get access to coaching and training and stuff like that, and then we want you to apply the coaching and training in a very lightweight way, just set some appointments for us. It can be, there's a version of that I think is okay. Now, if you're forcing people to buy your product and then do 6 months of like things before you give them like a role or an opportunity or an introduction to a client or something, that's when I start to think this is a little bit sketchy, you know. But it's their business; they get to make those decisions, right? I only have control over how I build my business. So I don't like it. I wouldn't go through it, but you know, some of those people get really great candidates, right? Big candidate pools that they get to go through. So something is working.
Okay. So, the last 10 minutes of the call. I really only have sort of 2 last questions, and you can make fun of me as much as you like, looking a pipe and having nothing at the back of my wall. I don't have interesting posters and books and stuff like yours. Sort of molding for now. The last 2 questions. What was a notable project you implemented that you actually felt glad doing, that sort of comes to mind where you're like, that was the best fucking work I've done ever?
Ooh.
And you can't say me.
Yeah.
Because we know each other.
One of the coolest things for me is whenever I get to have a conversation with someone who just has the complete wrong view of what selling is, right? Because their view of what sales is used car sales, right? So the jacket, the slick back hair, the fast talking, they can't trust them and stuff like that. And when I can bring someone into a call like this, right? And I can ask them 9 questions about their business, and then I can do a role play as their salesperson. People are blown away by it. They're like, this is how you sell them. Yeah, this is how we sell. And they're like, I had no idea that you could even ask these kinds of questions of people. And it's like, you're allowed to ask any question you want. You just have to be aware that they might not want to answer it. So how can you ask the questions you need to ask in ways that people want to answer them? And once people start thinking about it in that way, is when like a light on moment happens, just time and time and time again. You know, the book does a little bit of that. Like one of my really good friends is a martial arts instructor full time, so he runs a kung fu school, and I know him and his wife, and so I gave them a signed copy of the book whenever we first launched it. And she's more of a business type than he is, right? Like he loves kung fu, he loves running a school, but he doesn't treat it like a business, you know, which is okay. And he calls me out of the blue. He was like, "Man, we got to talk about your book." I said, "Uh-oh, what's up?" And he goes, "I've been wrong the whole time." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he goes, I was under the impression that if I tried to sell this to people, if I tried to like show people the value of this and get them interested in it, that I was selling out, that I was becoming the thing that I don't like in others. And I said, "How do you feel about it now?" And he goes, "Well, now I see that there's room for me to go offer this and talk about it and sell it and market it because it helps me grow the business. It doesn't really have an impact on who I am as a person." Yes. Like, right then and right there. Like, these are just actions and activities. They don't have to fundamentally compromise who you are at a deeper level. So, anytime I can have that kind of conversation and someone is like, "Whoa, I've been wrong this whole time," that's rad. Like, and I'm lucky enough that that's happened probably, 50, 75 times over the past 4 years, right? It doesn't happen all the time because some people aren't really ready to be coached. But when it does happen, it's nice.
And I know I said last 2 questions, really last 2 questions. What's been a nightmare project that you just absolutely like felt you pulling teeth? I had that experience. You saw my face all swollen up. So when was the last time you felt like somebody did a root canal on you trying to do a project and you're like, fuck that, never doing that again?
Man, okay, so I have to be careful here. Well,
and why?
Once again, it comes back to the back to the expectations of the leadership, right? And if you're thinking that a salesperson closes deals, and that if you're not closing deals, you're not a salesperson, your expectation of what that salesperson is actually going to be able to do in your organization is wrong. And anytime I have a bad project, it's because I don't disqualify around this idea that you don't really get it, indicating you don't really want to work with me, which is totally fine. You need to go work with someone else. Or like, I just don't ask enough questions around that. So it's my fault whenever these things happen, because I should be able to find those things and disqualify them and say, "Hey, I'm not the right fit for you," and stuff like that. So it's a reflection on me of trying to move too fast and not asking enough questions when it does happen. But my worst projects are the ones where they're thinking that a salesperson closes every deal and there's not any room to be able to go for the no.
Okay. And my last final question. When you look sort of like 2 or 3 years down the line, I don't know if that makes sense anymore, the interview question of 5 years from now, do you see yourself? Other than slightly longer hair and an even more full beard, is your hope? What happens with your methodology and how you're trying to sort of change the sales landscape to the extent that you can?
There are some communities of people who face very interesting struggles in sales, right? And the one that comes to mind most is women, right? Women have empathy at a level that most men don't have starting out. They have to go cultivate it, right? And that empathy creates really, really great conversational quality. Unfortunately, some women don't feel comfortable in sales roles because of the assertive nature that is required to be a salesperson. Like, you're there to get an outcome. Can you get an outcome? Because if not, that's going to be difficult to do. Well, that same level of empathy can sometimes get in the way of being assertive and like, okay, I need a yes or a no, and either one is okay. So sometimes there's a struggle for women of, I want to be in sales, but I don't want to be under this weight of being like a business woman, right? And all the stigma that goes along with that. So ideally, at the final stages, I want selling to be approachable by everybody who wants to do it, right? So if you're a single mom and you want to be able to drop your kids off at school and pick them up from school and stuff like that, and that means you can't really work like a full 8-hour day, awesome. I can find you a remote sales role, so that way you can work part of the day and still be able to pick up your kids. You're going to have to work to like figure it out, and there's going to be lots to learn and stuff, but it's a great opportunity for those kinds of people. And so I want more of those kinds of people. I also want to work with more people of color, right? Because like, as a big white guy, like, I don't have to deal with some of the stuff that other people do because they have a slightly different skin tone, right? So I want to work with those people. And then the last group that I'm really interested in trying to help are people who are transitioning out of the military, right? I'm prior service as well, and I've had some friends who don't handle transition very well, right? And they have trauma, they have PTSD. Some of them have got even some bigger issues than that. And part of it is just like, sales can be a great kind of transitionary point because it's high levels of activity, it's high levels of this, and that's what they're used to, right? So if I can provide like a way to transition out of the military into a thing that's still very goal-oriented, very driven, high accountability and stuff like that, they're going to have great opportunities to go get remote jobs and develop a skill set. And the military lends itself to this idea, because in the military, one of the big things is like preventative maintenance, right? You always got to be operationally ready, right? So that's why you do the PT, and that's why you're doing the cleaning and the drilling and everything else like that. Well, that's how we approach selling, right? Is that you're going to be hit with the same kinds of questions, the same kinds of concerns, the same kinds of things. So let's practice and prepare, so that way you're ready for it in front of that person. So these are like areas of people that I'm always like looking for, because like I really want to help them. But that's really the goal of SHERPA, right? SHERPA is meant to be a methodology that allows anybody to sell. So if you're an introvert, you can still have great sales conversations. If you don't like being high pressure, you can still have great sales conversations. If you don't want someone to make a mistake inside of their business, you can still be a good salesperson. That's the thing that we're trying to do. And most people don't. This is my soapbox. Most people, when it comes to this stuff, go through sales coaching and sales training, and it's all about trying to get that person to be like the coach, okay? Because those coaches only know how to get people across the finish line if they're just like them. And you've heard me, right? I don't want anybody trying to think that they need to sound like me or trying to sound like me, because then you're not sounding like yourself. Then you're not in the correct headspace that you need to be to have a really great conversation. So I think one of the things that we're fundamentally different is I can meet you exactly where you are right now and put you on a development path that's going to make you a great salesperson without you having to be somebody different in your sales conversations. So that's a weird thing to kind of talk about, because I feel like I'm bragging in a way that like everyone's going to be like, oh, come on. But like, this is what I hear from people. Like, I've never been coached before. I've just been talked at. And it's like, okay. So that's really the goal. I want it to be, I want sales to be approachable, and I want these communities who have never really looked at sales as like a valid role and lane for them to have access to it.
Cool. Last minute.
Yeah.
Where can the people that you've just mentioned find you? What can they do to the book? Do they need to send you a messenger pigeon or smoke signals?
I try to be all over the place. So if you can find adapted growth, adapted meaning in the past tense, meaning we've already helped you. Not adaptive in the current state, we've already done the work. So adapted, past tense. We're on all the social media channels. We have a TikTok account where I pull these nuggets from these sales calls and talk about them there. So if you're on social media in any way, capacity, I am there as well. You can look for Adapted Growth or John Small Mountain, which is kind of the name that I go by on my book and, in some of my posts and stuff like that. So I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter. But yeah, if you want some community, please reach out. We'd love to kind of have a call and see if you're a good fit for the community and invite you in. And that way you can be around other people who are doing the same thing.
Cool. I'll want to be respectful of your time. You have another call to get to, so I'll link to all that stuff below if you can get me those links.
Thank you so much for having me on, man. This was rad. I appreciate it.
Thanks, John. Good luck on the next call. Make a sale.
That's the plan. We'll see what happens.
Make a sale.
Yes, if it makes sense. We'll see. You're welcome. Cheers.
Cool, man. Thanks. Cheers.